6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. What's that? Have I gone into crazy lake mode again already? Not yet. It's coming though. I just finished a very fast 3-mile morning run. Couldn't run far today. Couldn't devote a lot of energy to training today, unfortunately. Got a big day. My son has a football game this morning, and then we're of course going to the UVA home football game today, where we are going to defeat the Miami Hurricanes at Scott Stadium in Charlottesville. Yeah, I need a haircut. But hey, I just ran 3 miles. Guys, this is crazy. Quick sidebar. Yes, we're going to read October Nights. From October Nights, I'm going to tell you who won the drawing. It's awesome. Check out what they're getting. 3 large wooden cookie cut out of gray birch jack-o'-lantern faces sent to them. Yeah, there's some checks, but that helps with the rustic appeal of these handmade items from me. So I've accepted the fact that a month from today, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be 49. I'm almost 50. Not as fast as I used to be. I was training to be the fastest MFer over 50 in Central Virginia. Raced about 4 times this past year. Got beat by college girls and women in their 50s and 60s, and I realized it just wasn't going to happen. So guess what? I haven't stopped running. I haven't given up on running. I've said, let's do it for health. Let's do it for fitness. Let's do it for mental health, because it is the better than any medication I've ever taken. Not a doctor. I'm not on any meds for mental health or physical aspects. What I've found, diet, lifestyle, exercise, eating healthy, not putting garbage in your body, be it garbage food or be it garbage substances, is the best medicine in the world, and it's best health insurance, if you ask me. But anyway, so I just let go of this concept of being fast. So I only had time and energy today to run 3 miles because we've got such a big day. We're going to a party some friends are having after the UVA game. Out of habit, I started my stopwatch. Maybe it's a magic watch. I don't know. Maybe it was a watch. I didn't stop it when I finished. Out of habit, I started it when I was doing this 3-mile course. I got to the turnaround spot, 1.5 miles out, and I just glanced at my watch, again out of habit, thinking about all the things I got to do today. So I guess I was in a bit of a rush, in a bit of a hurry. I got to the turnaround in 10 minutes. I'm like, wait a minute, this is going to be a 20-minute 3-mile run. That's sub 7-minute mile pace. The last time I had a decent race, I ran 7-minute mile pace for 5K, 3.1 miles. This is crazy. Well, I guess I'm going to hit the wall here, but I just kept thinking about my day, kept going. I thought, man, I got to get home and do the reading and let David J. in Boulder, Colorado, did not want his last name known when he submitted his scary story about true paranormal events he experienced to the channel. You can do it too and be considered in the drawing. The email is crazylake@mail.com, crazylake@mail.com. So David J., we're sending these to you. So I thought I got to make this video. I got to tell this guy he won. True Hauntings Volume 2 is going to come out the first week of November. You guys are sending in so many stories. It's awesome. So anyway, I finished my 3-mile run and I looked down at my watch and it said 18:55. Folks, I ran the second 1.5 miles in 8 minutes and 55 seconds, minute and 5 seconds faster than the first 1.5 miles. I averaged just under 6 minutes and 20 seconds pace per mile on a 3-mile run. That's the first time I've done that in over 20 years. So was it me or was it the watch? No, it was me. This watch is excellent. Listen, this is what is this? Timex Ironman. You know how I know this? It wasn't the watch making a mistake. It was the man, the lungs, the heart, the mind, and the legs doing the work. Because this is, in my opinion and in my recommendation, the best digital sports watch you can buy. Listen, you can get this on Amazon. I'll put a direct link to it in the description box below. And full disclosure, I got a part-time job. I'm now an Amazon affiliate associate, or whatever I'm called. I don't know. I just got the job this morning. But listen, since I graduated college nearly 25 years ago, I've owned 3 watches, and it's these. And you can get these for like $20. So 25 years divided by 3, that's $8. I got a part-time job, and I went to a state college, and I went through the public school system. You can do the math. Okay, we have calculators for that. Anyway, this is my third. Let me tell you what happened in the first 2. I lost one, and then on the second one, the only thing that went wrong with it was that the Indiglo light stopped working. I like to be able to push that and see what time it is at night if I wake up, so I know if I should go back to sleep or if it's time to jump out of bed, because it's 5 o'clock, and that's when I get up. So I highly recommend these watches, not just because I get paid a slight commission if you buy them from the link in the description box of this video below, but because I believe in the product. It really is amazing. But the run was amazing. It wasn't the watch. Now, that means that shows you too, never give up. Just never give up, okay? Hey, all you old effers in the Central Virginia region and anybody who wants to come here and race me, get ready, I'm back. You should see how much money I have, or how much energy I have. I was thinking manic, money, energy. You should see how manic and how much energy I had before I work out. Now, here we are. Can you believe it? October 29th. 29th, 30, 31. I can do that math because I have that many fingers on one hand, okay? 3 days until Halloween. This is a very spooky story. I hope you enjoy it. It's called The Story of the Second Inhabitants of my house, which is 130 years old and haunted AF. I'm sure you've heard it said, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. That's the story behind this story in a way. You see, I've always been a fan of all things macabre, be they Edgar Allan Poe or Ray Bradbury short stories or full-length novels written by His Majesty Stephen King. I used to stay up late, well past my childhood bedtime, watching such shows as Tales from the Dark Side or The Twilight Zone, and one of my many fantasies as a result of such interests was to someday live in an actual bona fide haunted house. It would take until I was in my 40s, but that fantasy finally became a reality after my family and I bought our house and land where we currently reside in Central Virginia, where I'm going to be the fastest MF for over 50. All challengers welcome. I include the land part because it seems to be just as haunted as the house itself. So get my 6. That means watch behind me, newcomers. You never know what you may or may not see lurking around in the background. Plus, isn't the scenery beautiful? And it's beautiful October night, even though it's morning as of this recording. After experiencing too many things that cannot be explained through reasonable and rational means in our house and on our property, and especially after finding out about the events that took place while the house's original inhabitants lived here in circa 1903, you'll remember these events from the final story of October Nights Part 1, dear reader, or dear listener in this part, or in this situation, a story titled The Ballad of Jim Brown. I decided to set out on a quest to find out what other sorts of tragedies might have befallen upon the many, many families who'd lived in our house and on our land over the course of the last 120 years. At this juncture, I'll point out how I'm sure you've also heard it said, be careful what you look for because you might just find it. Find it, at least one more piece to what is turning out to be a sizable puzzle I did. This is a story of our home's second inhabitants, the family who moved into our home in circa 1905 after the sharecroppers, the very ones who killed old Jessup after he'd killed Jim Brown, moved out. If you missed that story, you can get volumes 1 or 2 from our Etsy store or from Amazon, or you can find a playlist here on the channel and go watch a video. I did the reading from part 1 2 years ago. A man by the name of Brian, who was married to a woman named Stella, were the second inhabitants of our house. They would eventually have a son who I'll not name, nor shall I give the family surname out of respect of those in the area who still remember these fateful events by way of stories passed down from generation to generation, which, by the way, is how I came to the knowledge of this tale. Our tale starts with Brian across the Atlantic in Ireland. Brian had been born into a poor family, yet not one that was idle. He was raised with a strong work ethic instilled in him, and he had a natural desire to leave the lower classes and obtain affluence. He did so by selling watches on Amazon. No, I'm just kidding. Link is in the description box below. He did so by doing that which many in current American culture would like to say is not possible. He reached down figuratively and pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. By the time Brian was 30, which, remember, in the late 1800s, Ireland, or late 1800s anywhere, was much older than it is today. It probably would have been the equivalent of 45 or so. Brian had accumulated a respectable degree of wealth. He'd done so by running several successful small businesses, and like many self-made men, by sacrificing comfort for discomfort, going without any luxuries or any trappings of wealth, and also by going without sleep, averaging only 4 hours a night because he spent so much time running his businesses. Some people would call that getting lucky. We call those people losers. Remember, folks, the difference between successful people and unsuccessful people is that the successful people are willing to do the things unsuccessful people aren't, whether it was 1800s Ireland or our modern times. Many among the local affluent, rather many among the locals who had been born into affluence, had been noticing Brian's efforts, and over the years they'd watched his wealth grow. They'd seen, while they'd idled away on the golf courses in their clubs, a man, Brian, who'd been born poor, through his own efforts change his stars, as it were, by the sweat of his brow and join their ranks. And more than just a few of them did not like this. They did not, well, whatever. For you see, these trust baby types felt insecure in comparison by the likes of Brian and others like him, rare as they were. They knew that should they, the trust baby types, lose their wealth for any reason, they would no doubt starve, for they've never had to do, nor had they ever done, a day's work in their lives. Whereas Brian and those like him had obtained their financial status in life through their own means. They knew that if Brian and those like him were to lose all they had, why, they'd not just make it all back, they'd probably make it back in half the time, having done so before already. Self-made people like Brian would know what to do more of and what to do less of or none of in order to save time in rebuilding their wealth. In a word, the trust baby types had come to feel completely inadequate and frankly intimidated if ever they found themselves in Brian's presence, and simply by the knowledge of his existence. So they came up with a plan. A group representing the local elite approached Brian. They flattered him, they said they'd been amazed at what he'd accomplished throughout his life, and they welcomed him aboard, and they told him of an amazing investment opportunity they were all taking part in, and they invited him to be part of it. Brian felt exuberant, and he agreed to take part in the investment with little thought actually put into the matter. He put most of his liquid assets, most as in all, into the investment, though this group who had approached him, through this group that had approached him, and he lost it all. The group had set him up and he had taken the bait. Not to stand for this, Brian went straight to the local authorities to report the fraud. But alas, the local law enforcement officials were all in the pockets of the local wealthy elite, as is the case in most locales, whether people want to accept this grim fact or not, and therefore nothing was done. "We can get my people to take care of him," Brian's mother said when he'd informed her and his father that there was nothing to be done by law enforcement. Most folks, at least where I'm from, in West by God, Virginia, and even where I live now in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of the motherland of Virginia, would take this to mean that Brian's mother was suggesting they go up into the hollows or out into the backwoods and round up every hillbilly redneck hick relative that could be found and go land ass-whipping on the silver spoon son of a bitches who'd taken advantage of her son. But that is not what she meant. That's what we mean where I'm from. No, that was not what she meant at all. For you see, Brian's mother was a witch from a long line of witches. It was not blood relatives she'd been talking about when she'd mentioned her people, rather her coven, though a few within the coven were her relatives. "Let's do it," Brian said. Seeing no other way to exact his revenge and to get back what was rightfully his, Brian, with his mother, traveled to where his mother had been born and raised, deep in the backwoods of an old Irish community so hidden most folks didn't even know it existed, and there they met with the coven. Brian explained his situation to the coven elder, who told him, "The moon will be full in a fortnight. Return then, and we will perform a ritual that will allow you to gain back all that was stolen from you and 10 times more." A fortnight later, Brian and his mother returned. Waiting on Brian this time was a beautiful fair maiden who could not have been even 20 years old. She was a black Irish beauty with big almond eyes, high cheekbones, and jet black hair that went to her waist. Her waist, the very one the ends of her long hair extended to, was so small, Brian believed he could have wrapped his hands around it and felt his fingers touching. Yet her breasts were ample and full of the stuff of every man's fantasy, regardless of the period of history. And the way she gazed at him from the beginning, old Brian was in love. Nay, lust, which he'd taken for love. Don't we all in our youth, in middle age and old age? Which he'd taken for love, and as the coven elder explained the ritual about to take place, Brian heard but little, because he was focusing on the stare being given him by this beautiful maiden. It was only when they handed him a club and said, "When the time comes, use this," that he was brought out of his trance. Use this for what? Brian asked, feeling hesitant for the first time throughout the ordeal. Don't worry, the beautiful maiden said. And by the way, my name's Stella. Once again, Brian had forgotten that there was an entire world which existed outside of Stella's eyes. As the darkness fell and the full moon rose, the coven, with Brian being led by the beautiful Stella, who'd taken his hand when they'd handed him the club and had not let go since, made their way even deeper into the forest to what appeared to be an altar. Let the ritual begin, the coven elder said, and out came the coven with wicked chants, praising the devil and demons and all things evil that could be imagined. Drums began beating and members of the coven unrobed to reveal that they'd been wearing nothing underneath their robes. They danced nude in the moonlight to the beat of the drum and the rhythm of the chants. Brian was lost in Stella's eyes, and as he had been for some time, when all of a sudden a black bag was placed on the altar. A black bag that writhed and squirmed. Now, the coven elder screamed at Brian. Do it now! Once again, Brian was brought out of his trance and back to his senses. He looked at the bag, now realizing what it was they wanted him to do. There was a living thing inside the bag doing the writhing and squirming, and they meant for Brian to beat it to death with the club. I will not, he protested. Do it, the coven elder demanded. Do it, the entire coven screamed, but still Brian would not, until... Do it, Stella said sensually, and then she ripped off her robe, revealing aforementioned breasts to Brian, and he found renewed purpose for living. He was willing to do anything for those breasts. He lifted the club high into the air, and then he brought it down with such force the blow should have meant sudden death for whatever was inside the bag. But it did not. The thing in the bag began screaming in agony, and Brian raised the club and brought it down again with equal force to the first blow, but still the thing in the bag continued to scream. Brian, being brought to his senses once again from the screaming emanating from the bag, laid the club on the altar and was about to open the bag and see if there was anything he could do to reverse the damage he'd already done. But Stella grabbed the club and handed it back to him and put her nude body against Brian's still-robed body and said, "Do it for me." And she began grinding her nether regions into his nether regions, and Brian did that which she told him to do. With one final blow, the bag stopped moving, and whatever was inside it stopped screaming. It was dead. Do you, Brian, take this lovely maiden, Stella, as your sinfully wedded wife? The coven elder asked, coming up with the book of darkness in hand. Oh my God, yes, Brian screamed, and Stella confirmed her vow, and the two were joined in the most unholy matrimony. And they consummated their marriage on the altar in front of the coven. And as the coven consummated with each other, one and all, just for the hell of it, on the ground around the altar. The word "as" isn't in there. Actually it was, as the coven consummated. It was something else, whatever. I found one typo in 29 stories so far. Damn it, Truman Jackson, sober up in the Philippines so you can edit this next book. Brian, his mother, and his new bride, Stella, spent most of the rest of the night returning to Brian's village. What he'd done to the thing in the bag did not sit well with Brian, and though he was happy, he thought to be taking this beautiful young maiden home with him as his wife, he feared what price he might have paid to do so. These were his thoughts as he drifted off to sleep only an hour before dawn. Brian's sleep would not last long, as only an hour past sunrise, law enforcement officials came knocking at his door. "Aw, shit," he thought. "They know what I've done." Brian opened the door and found that he was mistaken. As it was, the local group of trust baby scammers had finally scammed the wrong person, someone who had the local law enforcement officials more indebted to them than the wealthy group of scammers. As such, the scammers had been locked up, their assets seized, and the folks who'd come by to see Brian had stopped by to return what had been stolen from him to its rightful owner. However, they'd made a mistake in their accounting, and they returned to Brian a sum that was 10 times greater than what had originally been stolen. "We've got to get out of here," Brian told his new wife, Stella, after the law enforcement officials had left. "They'll figure out the mistake. They'll come to take it back. And if they ever find out what I've done, where will we go?" Stella asked. "To America," Brian said. And together, they rounded up the trunks of money and they packed what little they'd need for their voyage across the Atlantic. as far as the bare necessities went, and before the sun set on that very day, they were aboard a steamer that would take them across the Atlantic Ocean to the new world where their new life awaited. Their voyage across the Atlantic took 2 months, which was not bad in the early 1900s, as it could often take as many as 3. Brian had heard much talk on the way over from men not as affluent as himself or affluent at all of how they were so excited to get to the American South and become sharecroppers, something they and their ancestors were very familiar with, sharecropping having been a way of life in Ireland long before it became a way of life after the abolition of slavery in America. Brian determined, while listening to these men talk, that he would be the farmer, since he was once again a man of means, and he would hire others to work underneath him as sharecroppers. He shared his plans with Stella, and this is exactly what they did. Once getting off the boat at Ellis Island, Brian and Stella wasted no time seeing the sights of New York or anywhere in America. They wanted to get away from anyone and anything associated with immigration in case the law came looking for them. They made it as far south as Virginia, where they found a nice plot of 400 acres of land in Albemarle County, nestled within the Blue Ridge Mountains, that was for sale. It had been on the market longer than usual because it seemed that a couple of murders had taken place on the land just a few years prior, something to do with sharecroppers not getting along, and something about a dog, and a group of guys killing another guy who had supposedly hanged one of their friends from a tree. That big oak tree right there, as a matter of fact. Yeah, that very tree. If you haven't read part 1, you need to, brah. Okay? Blah, 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 hanged from a tree. But mostly, before he could kill them first, because he was a mean old cuss who'd actually been rumored to have killed his own parents a few counties over. Of course, that's old Jessup, who was hanged over there. This place is haunted AF, I'm telling you. Mean old farmers and sharecroppers. And at any rate, the family that owned the property was more than happy to sell out to Brian and Stella on the cheap. Brian and Stella prospered on their Virginia farm. They had an adequate number of sharecroppers, though they both worked the farm full-time themselves. After being in the U.S. and Virginia for a couple of years, it was as if that fateful night in the backwoods of Ireland had never happened. They'd not thought of anyone from law enforcement in Ireland even caring enough about them anymore to try to track them down if they had come into the knowledge of the events of that dark night. After having been on their farm for 4 years, Stella became pregnant. They would have a son, and he was healthy and happy and the spitting image of both parents. Brian and Stella loved their son as he loved them. It was happily ever after, until the boy turned 4. "We have to do it now, you know," Stella said to Brian one beautiful fall morning in October, much like the one we have here this morning during this reading. While they were having breakfast, their son, having already finished his food, was in the living room playing with hand-carved wooden toys his father had made him. Maybe this place is more haunted than I thought. "We have to do it on the night of the next full moon." "Do what?" Brian asked. "Kill him," Stella said. Brian stood, the events of that fateful night in Ireland from all those years ago now rushing to his head. He took Stella by the arm and pulled her outside. "What the fuck are you talking about?" he said, as soon as the back door was closed. "We have to fulfill the contract," she said. "The covenant, or we lose it all. It was all part of the deal." "Let me repeat myself," Brian said. "What the fuck are you talking about?" "Oh, you pious prick," Stella said, ripping her arm out of Brian's hand. "How convenient for you to forget. I guess maybe because it wasn't your baby the first time around, but now that it is, you want to take the high road." "Do I need to repeat myself again?" he said. "The coven," she said, "and the covenant. Did you really believe it was just a coincidence that the day after you did what you did, somehow you had your wealth returned plus 10 times more? It was the agreement you made." "That's exactly what it was," Brian said. "Coincidence. And that's all it was, nothing more." "The hell it was," Stella said. "I kept up my end of the pact so that we could have this life, and I will not go back to being a peasant. Either you do it or I do it. The moon is full at the end of the week, so figure it out." And then she stomped off, out into the woods, to brood. Over the next couple of days, Stella would relate a tale to Brian that he absolutely did not want to believe, but which he felt was absolutely true. It appeared as if Stella had not been quite the fair maiden he'd believed her to be upon sight after all. As it turns out, she'd married a man much older than her when she was only 16, and she'd married him for his money. Stella had been a street urchin, and the older man had taken her in as a waif, but she played him and made her way to his bed and then extorted him, demanding he marry her, or she would claim that he'd had his way with her against her will. I almost told you her real name, but whatever. We've heard enough about that turd. No sooner than the man had married her and impregnated her did he catch her in bed with one of his stable boys. He summarily threw her, pregnant as she was, back into the very streets from which he'd saved her. Stella had taken up with the coven after this, all in an effort to regain the wealthy living standards she'd enjoyed, brief as they were, with her husband before being found out for being an adulteress. The coven said they would help her if she were to do two things. Firstly, allow them to use her soon-to-be-born infant as a sacrifice to Satan, which she had, by way of Brian's club. And secondly, that she would also give birth to another child who, too, would be sacrificed to Satan at the time of the full moon, which came the same period from the time she'd entered into unholy matrimony with Brian, and until the birth of the child, which, as it turned out, was 4 years. The coven elder told Stella that if she did not hold up her end of the contract with the sacrifice of the second child, she would lose everything she had, and once again she would end up living in destitution. "We live in poverty then," Brian had told Stella after she'd revealed her true past to him. "Money is nothing. My son is the world." "You might not mind living in poverty," Stella had said, "but I do, and I won't. If you won't do it, then I will." The night of the full moon came, and Brian slept with one eye and both ears open. Sure enough, just after midnight, he heard the bed creaking as Stella got out of bed and made her way downstairs to their son's room. Brian followed secretly, and when he saw that Stella had stashed a knife beside their son's bed and had now taken it up and raised it above her head to do the unthinkable, he intervened. "No!" he screamed, rushing toward her and grabbing the knife. A struggle ensued, and during the struggle, the unthinkable happened. The knife found its way into Stella's beautiful bosom and through it and to her heart. She fell to her knees, and she died. "It will not be done," Brian screamed toward the ceiling. "Nay, the heavens! Nay, the heavens!" And as he screamed, outside, the skies above opened up and a torrential downpour came. "I will not do it!" Just then, Brian heard his son say, "Papa?" He looked over, and the boy transformed into a swarm of black flies. These black flies began swirling, slow at first, and then faster and faster, until they formed what looked like a tornado's funnel. And then they flew out of the room and up the stairs and into the attic, and then in the then quite new house, the attic of the then quite new house, where they would hide inside the walls and go dormant until they would become active every so many years, always on the night of a full moon in the month of October, during which there would always be a tragic, untimely death within this now old and very haunted AF, I'm saying, or on the very haunted property AF, upon which it sat. Said property already soiled by the blood of Jim Brown from that tree and old Jessup from that one over there. Seeing that he'd lost his son anyway, Brian fell on the blade of the knife like a samurai warrior who'd been humiliated by defeat in battle, and he too, like the rest of his family on that dark October night, perished forevermore. The end. There you have it, folks. Only 2 stories left to go. Tomorrow's is a good one. Tomorrow's is the only newer story written in here, and you haven't heard it. It's called The Legend of Chief Cockton. It was originally titled One Hell of a Bad Trip on the Res. It happened this summer when we took our cross-country trip out to the Grand Canyon when we stayed on the Navajo Indian Reservation. It is a true story, and I almost told it this summer when we got back. I know some of you out there wanted to hear the story because I alluded to it a few times and then just shut the hell up about it. That's tomorrow night's story, The Legend of Chief Cockton. So for now, again, man, if you want to run as fast as a former state champion who went to college on a full track scholarship, Buy the Iron Man Timex stopwatch. Oh yeah, and run every day, like for years and years and years and years. Don't put garbage in your body. Don't drink, smoke, do drugs, none of that stuff. And links in the description box below. See you for more next time. Man, does time fly when you're having fun.